All right, praise the Lord, class. I just would like to discuss my first paper. It's actually going to be my paper on Job, and so I'll talk a little bit about that today. First of all, we understand that the purpose of the book of Job is essentially to talk about suffering, specifically God's role in suffering. And again, the question is asked, how can God be just if there is suffering? And so this entire book is meant to take the reader or the hearer on a journey that allows them to be able to understand how God is working and moving through our suffering and how his love is the common theme that helps us to get through suffering, whatever it is. And so there are a lot of themes within this book that help us understand God's justice in our suffering. First of all, there is a presentation and deconstruction of retribution theology, a discussion of God's creation, and the metaphorical usage of legal terms throughout the book in order to describe God's justice in more tangible terms, legal terms. Also, there's a lot of arguments about how and when this book was composed. There are a variety of proponents for composition in the patriarchal period, the period of Solomon, a pre-exilic period, or an exilic period. And basically, no one is certain either where the book actually came from. The writer of the book that we use for class, Bullock, he actually proposes that the book could have been composed in Edom, since the land of Uz is identified with Edom in Lamentations, and that proper names that are used by the author actually have counterparts with the lineage of Esau. So even though the book may have originated in Edom, Job's language and worship practices, as we see throughout the book, are very similar to those of the Hebrews. And so most people are going to agree that it seems very likely that Job is a Hebrew. And even though we don't know exactly who the author was, a lot of the language and customs, concepts that are presented in the book are very similar to the Israelite religion, so it's likely that the author was also an Israelite, perhaps maybe even Job himself. No one really knows. The book is actually structured in the following way. It begins with a prose prologue in chapters 1 and 2. There is a poetic body, which consists of chapter 3, verse 1, through chapter 42, verse 6, and then there's an epilogue in chapter 42, verses 7 through 17. The prologue details how Job comes to his tragic situation, and it also gives the reader a bird's eye view of the situation so that we understand why Job has lost everything, and that Job is actually a very righteous person, and it's not his guilt that has brought him to this place. The body of the book, which is that middle poetic section, actually begins with Job expressing his pain concerning the situation, and it ends after there have been 3 cycles of conversations with him and his friends in which they argue concerning God's justice and role in this situation. His friends are Bildad, Eliphaz, Zophar, and Elihu, and they all debate concerning why Job is suffering. Each friend asserts that God's judgment would not allow a righteous man to suffer, and so they put forth a theology of retribution, but Job consistently maintains his innocence. And then finally, the book climaxes with God's response to Job's questions and accusations, and God actually questions Job back. And we find that through God's questioning, Job actually repents because he recognizes how wonderful God is as a creator, and how as a creator he cares so much for his creation, that God is still just in his eyes, and so he recognizes that he has made a mistake in misjudging God. And finally, the book resolves in an epilogue, and this shows us how Job triumphs over his friends in God's eyes, and then God actually restores Job and brings him back to the place where he was. However, the key thing to remember here is though Job was restored financially and he was given his possessions back, he never fully recovers from this suffering, because there are still scars there in Job through this experience that he has suffered. And so I think that's a key take-home point for us as the readers, that even if we can learn through this book to recognize God in our suffering, there are points and times in suffering that we will endure that change us forever and hopefully change us for the better, enabling us to truly know who God is. And that's what Job ends the book understanding. He truly begins to understand who God is through this situation. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you.